Good morning. You are watching Focus on Parliament on Civic Space TV, brought to you by the Center for Constitutional Governance. I am Isaac Kwagala, your host. In Parliament, once again the spectre of violence has reared its ugly head, mirroring the chaotic scenes of 2017 during the infamous Tojikwatako constitutional amendment debate. This time round, the violence, however, being precipitated by the discussion that has been intense and heated surrounding the controversial and rather now successful move by the government to merge the Uganda Coffee Development Authority with the parent Ministry of Agriculture. Also in the United States, Donald J. Trump has made a momentous comeback to the White House by defeating her Democratic rival, Kamala Harris. Well, on today's edition of Focus on Parliament, we discuss these two significant recent developments and assess the implications that they portend for our country's future, Uganda. Our viewers, once again, you are most welcome to the program. I now have the pleasure to introduce to you my distinguished guest, Professor Mwambusa Debesa, who is a renowned political commentator and professor of history and political science. Professor, you're most welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Say hello to the viewers.
Thank you. Good morning to the viewers and listeners out there. And I'm glad to be here with you to share issues of national concern so that we can see how to take this country forward towards a united, cohesive nation state.
Thank you, Professor, for joining us. Let me start on a rather light note. Professor, last week, we saw a footage carried by the national broadcaster where you were discussing history with the head of state. Could you kindly give us maybe just a snippet of how that discussion went?
That footage you saw, I think even the president tweeted it. Is it tweeting now
Yes,
or
yes,
Xing?
it is, yes.
Or is it Xing?
X,
I don't
on
know.
his X account.
Yes, it was not so much, except that during independence I had given an interview to UBC TV and about the independence and the legacy of colonialism, and there is he listened to it. That is the president, and he says he agreed with most of my submissions except one, which was how I characterized Uganda's history as Uganda being a British creation, and he has a slightly different perspective of that. And he had invited me together with some fellow historians, as well as ministry officials and the vice chancellor of Makerere University, to deliberate on that question of Uganda's history with the view to seeing how to interpret Uganda's history and see how history can be a tool for nation building. So the discussion was around that, and it went on very well. And we hope to discuss more about it and see how history can be an instrument for nation building if interpreted correctly.
A commendable effort, I should say. Professor, well, let us now return to the major topic for discussion today. First, the events in Parliament that have transpired in the course of this week, where we witnessed very heated exchanges on the floor, but there was one disturbing incident where a member of Parliament, the Honorable Akol, exchanged physically with the Honorable Zake, and to the extent that the Honorable Zake was admitted. As I speak today, he's still in Zambia hospital nursing wounds or injuries as a result of that physical altercation. What does this point us to, given the current political trajectory of the country? Because as we would like to imagine, this is supposed to be a civil discussion, a civil debate, an exchange where the most predominant view takes the day. Should we first degenerate into violence for us to settle political differences?
Thank you for that question about this politics of militarism. I think the exchange between the two MPs is a reflection or manifestation of the ghetto versus the bush politics. We are having the bush meeting the ghetto. I think the bush politics definitely was uncivil. It was an insurgency, and out of that insurgency, the NRM came to power through that military means, and they were schooled into that norm of violence and militarism. On the other side, we have the ghetto now. The people who are coming from the ghetto and schooled into that norm of the ghetto, equally, I don't know whether they are planning an insurrection, because the coming up of people in an urban center, I think that is called insurrection, whereas the other one of the bush and the guns is called an insurgency. So we are having the bush versus ghetto politics meeting, and that does not augur well for national integration and civil politics. Instead of having the proper competition of ideas, we are witnessing a case of competition of organism, competition of incivility, and whoever has more arms or the capacity takes the day. And I don't think that is how we expected the country to evolve. From the constitutional provisions, especially when you look at the preamble to the Constitution, and actually the first statement, it goes like, considering our political instability in the past, we hereby, and then we move forward. And that is that statement, although it is in the preamble statement, should be guiding us to have certain norms of civility, of political civility as we move forward. But what are we seeing now in this ghetto versus bush politics? We are seeing tension and friction and not dialogue. Otherwise, we should have sober minds and have a dialogue. But part of what creates that political polarization that leads to violence, I think, is also because we have not had a political space opened up for everybody to participate on equal basis. I think there is still inequality in access to political rights. When we talk about inequality, most people go to the economic inequality, financial inequality, income inequality, but there is also such a thing as political inequality, whereby some of the political players or political class or political organizations do not have equal space to participate in the politics and elections. Others have others have a monopoly of, for example, freedom of association, freedom to assemble, freedom to speak, and others are not given that opportunity. Now, that leads to friction. When there is injustice, you expect that friction. So, I think what we witness in Parliament is a microcosm of a macrocosm. What I mean there is that it is a minute representation of what goes on in the country, where we have failed to have civil politics infused into our body politic. We are yet to witness such a kind of friction, tension, and violence in the elections. We are not talking about even the inter-party friction and violence, like between supporters of opposition and supporters of NRM, but even within the same party, whether it is within intra-NRM alone or within NUP alone, we are going to witness such a kind of violence because we have failed to come up with rules and regulations to police our minds. Politics is not about the written rules only. You may have a constitutional provision spelling out clear modalities and procedures of how to interact as individuals, as organizations. But if there are no norms and written rules infused, imbibed, embedded in our norms, the unwritten rules, then we are likely to witness what we are witnessing in Parliament. Unfortunately, both sides seem to be not so much concerned about it, because before the incident happened, both groups were threatening each other. I heard the opposition saying we are going to have a showdown. I heard the NRM also saying we are going to have a showdown. And those statements were made before they went to meet. So I don't know why there was no intervention to make sure that we don't embarrass ourselves. But also, I think mediation is very critical. Mediation of competition. So, here, when it comes to elections, you find the mediator, who is the electoral commission or commissioners, they take sides. They are not neutral, they are partial, they are not impartial. And that leads to conflicts, subsequently violence conflicts during elections. But even in Parliament, I think the speaker is supposed to be neutral and giving confidence to both sides that she or he is neutral and therefore will be a neutral mediator or arbitrator. But the moment you know that the mediator is going to be partial, then you are likely to have those impulses coming out and people start fighting each other. So it is inevitable that such happenings will take place because we are lacking neutral mediators and we are lacking norms to police our minds so that we have civilized politics in a civilized country. And we expected a fundamental change that were promised by NRM. And one of the fundamental changes we expected was to have civil politics, so that we don't have militarization of political competition. Unfortunately, we have remained with this legacy of militarism in Parliament. It was witnessed in the 1960s, especially 1966 and 1967, where MPs and the cabinet members were arrested. Instead of having a competition of ideas, you now have a competition of hooliganism. I call it political hooliganism, to leave the civil way of resolving conflicts and use uncivil methods. Unfortunately, we have inherited this and we are continuing with this one. So, unless there is a policing of the minds, unless we evolve norms of civility, we are going to have such a happening. So that's why my caution here is to the ghetto politicians and the bush politicians to leave behind ghettoism and leave behind bushism, and we take the path of civilization if we have to build this nation. Otherwise, if our leaders fight like this, we have sayings in our local languages here that when you steal, when you are carrying a baby on your back, you are teaching the baby how to steal. Similarly, if we have a central institution like parliament and we have such violent conflict in parliament, our leaders, what do you expect to happen to the general population, to their supporters, when it comes to elections or indeed any other political competition? So, political competition needs to be demilitarized, political competition needs to be civil, and by that then we shall build a nation. Short of that, the politics of ghettoism and bushism is taking this country to a wrong direction.
Professor, you make a passionate and sober appeal to the politicians to moderate their conduct and reflect civil politics as such. But I want to ask the question, it's now been almost 40 years of the NRM in power, and it seems to me as an observer that militarism and militarization of politics is a key hallmark of their understanding of politics, and it reflects in the practice their approach to politics. But on the other hand, you have highlighted the emerging trend of what we call ghetto politics.
No compromise.
Which, observers could also argue that this is a product of the NRM's approach of militarism to politics. So how do we now strike a balance? It seems to be a tough balancing act. Who bears the ultimate responsibility to ensure that we really change the fortunes, the political fortunes of this country, and how?
If I can even digress a bit and give a wider perspective of militarism, militarism has gone even beyond the political competition. It has gone to economic development, or development generally. Because we are militarizing development. We are militarizing agriculture, militarizing fisheries, militarizing forestry, militarizing even management of urban markets, militarizing the railways, militarizing the construction industry, name it. So it seems we are militarizing society, and we seem to be saying that is the new normal, to militarize. But now, even the opposition is looking at militarism and militantism as a way forward.
Isn't it a direct response to perhaps the attack that is being directed at them?
That's precisely what I'm saying. The militarizing and violence politics, which has got, I think, the roots in the way the government came into power. That Bush politics, and for President Museveni, I don't know what that is what that informs him, because he's the biggest shaper of the Ugandan politics, especially the NRM politics. He has got a background which some of us are privy to, in terms of how he was nurtured intellectually, because if I happened to have read his BA graduating dissertation titled Fanonian Theory of Violence and its Verification in Mozambique, because he had actually gone to Mozambique, the liberated area, the Makonde area, to do partly to do his study, to do research for his graduating BA dissertation, which dissertation, together with other colleagues of his, I think 13 or 12 of them, they were published in a monograph by Tanzania Publishing House they were published. So that paradigm of looking at violence as liberation, as espoused by Fanon, I think should be brought out of that original decolonization context. Because colonialism had refused, especially in some countries like Algeria, settler colonies like Algeria, Kenya, Angola, Zimbabwe, South Africa, because colonialism had refused to evolve and hand over self-rule without peacefully that is, then people had to resort to violence. But I think we need to discard that paradigm. That today, you don't have to use violence in order to win a political contest. You don't have to use violence in order to push your idea and your vision. Because, like in the USA, when you look at this election of this week, you realize that they passed through a civil competition, completely not agreeing with each other. Each one had each side had its own vision, but as outgoing President Joe Biden said, it was a competition of visions. So let the competitions of visions be allowed space and not use underhand methods and not using manipulation, and we shall have civil politics and create national unity. But this militarization of political competition is a black hole in the political development and evolution of post-colonial states like Uganda. And when you look at in African countries, those countries that have avoided the violence aspect are building nation states stronger and strong economies. Because once you exercise violence, you expect counter-violence. And that is what is going to happen, and it needs to be stopped. Look at Botswana. They have recently had elections. Not even a dog was shot on the street. And that's why Botswana is praised, is giving praise in the whole of Africa. But these other countries where we have violence and we have not institutionalized methods of resolving conflicts peacefully, and we have not had mediating institutions. This is a result of the lack of trust or trust deficit within the institution. So, what you witness in Parliament, among others, is lack of trust in the office of the Speaker. If the people knew that the Speaker is neutral, I think there would be less of that violence. If the members of Parliament knew that the judiciary is also autonomous and can mediate the political conflicts, people would wait. Instead of fighting on the floor of the House, they would wait for the bill to be passed, and then they can challenge it in the judiciary. But you see, the judiciary in Uganda is also partisan. The parliament is also partisan. And that is frustrating. And a frustrated individual, whether in politics or outside the politics, is likely to use other means to express oneself when the civil ones are missed, when that opportunity is not provided for. So, unfortunately, the trend of the country is towards this ghettoism and bushism. And the two are not taking us to the right path of constructing civilized politics. The word civilized actually is derived, the the root origins of civilization, of civil politics, is non-violent politics. That's why the developed countries, the functioning democracies, no longer have political prisoners. If you find a country anywhere in the world that has got political prisoners, you know that that country's politics has not yet become civil. There is absolutely nothing that warrants having political prisoners. Like the functioning democracies in Europe, you don't find there political prisoners. They are not there. They go for competition of ideas, competition of visions, competition of values, and when your side has not convinced the population, then you wait until such a time when you can also come back and promote your vision. But here, it is not the political factors that determine the outcome of elections. The will of the people is not reflected in political competition, fair political competition. It is reflected in who organizes best. And it seems the best organizational factor is having violence, is having the gun. And that is imbibed in the minds of the people to the extent that now even the voters, the civilians, the general population does not believe that civil politics can work. And that's why anybody who comes up with civil methods of work is shunned by the voters. They want those who promote violence. Take the example of the late Paulo Semogerere. He wanted civil politics, non-violent politics, until people said, this one is fit to be a priest, maybe. He is not fit to be a politician. And yet, he was the one promoting the values of civil and civilized politics. These days, they talk about Mujisha Muntu. They don't want to support his aunt party because they think he's too soft. They want to go for the ghetto politics of exercising muscles and the bush politics of coming bare booted with the gun. And that does not augur well for national integration. I have said here, I have said elsewhere, that the sooner Ugandans realize that Uganda is still not yet a fully functioning nation state, and therefore we need to marshal all possible ways to ensure that we have civilian politics, we have free competition, we have a spirit of tolerance and accommodation, so that we build this nation state. This nation state can have its national integrity compromised. And I have heard people making statements to the effect that, Uganda has been there, it will always be there, it will survive anybody. Oh my God, that is not borne by history. It is not even history of long ago. There was a country called Yugoslavia under Marshal Tito. He ruled it for more than 30 years. It is now 5 or 6 states. It has disintegrated. There is no Yugoslavia now. Even the Soviet Union, one of the most powerful nations in the world, is no longer there. Now we have Russia and these other, Ukraine and these other states. Russia disappeared. I don't think there is something called a nation state in Libya today. Or for that matter in Sudan, especially the Khartoum Sudan, but even South Sudan, even Somalia. So we are not lacking examples from where to learn in these fragile states and failed states. There is no guarantee that Uganda can't be a failed state, considering this kind of violent competition. We are not saying today Uganda is a failed state, but it can become one unless we exercise our restraint and try to promote the norms of free and non-violent competition. But to have competition that involves the exercising of muscle, the use of hardware instead of software, and we think that we are great, we can be great today, tomorrow we may not be great. But in any case, we should have in mind Uganda as a country created by the British in 1894 as a hardware, but the software is still malfunctioning. I'm talking about the intangible aspects of human beings, the norms, the values, the principles, the ideals of nationhood that we share in common together. Instead of sharing violence traits, we should share compromise, accommodation, and tolerance.
Professor, before we go in for a commercial break, just briefly, now that the government has achieved its aim of merging the Uganda Coffee Development Authority with its parent Ministry of Agriculture, what are the practical implications for the farmer, but also the wider coffee market in the country?
Thank you for that question. Allow me some minutes to talk about this debate, which to me was not a sober debate and was not intellectual. In the intellectual field, sorry to bring in the question of intellectualism and research, there is those who have been involved in research and research methodology, they know this concept of, or this principle, that correlation is not causation. Correlation is not causation. That you don't look at the correlation between two variables and you think one causes the other. The best example that I have seen given as an illustration of that principle is about ice cream. That it was found in a certain country that most people used it to drown in water whenever they were taking ice cream. And therefore, from a casual observation, you may think that ice cream leads people to drown. But the thing is that the two are not, they are correlated, but they don't cause each other. It is only that when people are taking ice cream, it is because it was hot. And that is when most people went to the water and drowned there. So similarly, I have heard people from one side arguing that, you see, UCDA is responsible for the increased coffee exports and production in Uganda. But I don't think that that is necessarily so.
You don't find it intellectual enough?
No, it is, you see, there is correlation
but
that
no
when
causation.
there is UCDA, there is increased coffee production. But it does not follow that
necessarily it is the cause.
No, it is not necessarily so. There could be other, what is called in research, confounding variables. I mean, you could find that the international market is responsible, that coffee prices went up.
The forces of demand and supply.
They were so high during this period. That's why there is coffee up. It could be, in Uganda case, that mango and its slogan of Militarism could be responsible. Not necessarily UCDA. It could be any other factor that was responsible for that. So I think that argument of correlation is equal to causation does not necessarily hold water, although it may. On the other hand, the government has been arguing that, look here, the problem of high government expenditure is because of these agencies like UCDA. That is also correlating without necessarily causing. What may have caused this high government expenditure could be other factors. I mean, look at the increased administrative expenditure of RDCs, presidential advisors, a big parliament, a big cabinet, and all these other expenditures that have arisen. You don't necessarily attribute it to these agencies, and therefore you do away with agencies. And you do not argue also that when agencies are brought back to the ministry, they would perform very well. But why were they created? There was a problem of red tape, of bureaucracy in the ministry, of incompetence in the ministry. How won't it go back also? Won't we have that incompetence? So anyway, the arguments were not all so enough because the population was left out. Like these readings, first reading, second reading, and then third reading on the second and third reading on the same day, and then they vote as if the world was ending tomorrow without involving you and me, without having a parliamentary committee where the general public would also bring in their views.
So, Prof, you're highlighting inadequate public participation with regard to the
and that is not being
enactment.
democracy. That's not democracy. Democracy means the rule of the people. And the people do not have to be represented in the parliament only, representative democracy. We also want popular democracy. And the NRM 10-point program said that we shall have representative democracy and popular democracy. Now the popular democracy has been thrown overboard. And this is where we are. So I don't think that defeating one side through using underhand methods is a solution to the problem. To the contrary, it has polarized the country more. And so what ordinarily should have been a coffee bill has now created more Ugandan questions. The Buganda question, the Northern question, now the coffee question, the Bunyoro question,
Bugisu.
the Rwenzori question, the Eastern question, the Karamoja question, the military question, the religious question. Instead of working towards removing these questions, we are pushing them just because of self-serving interest, and we are not sensitive. So, to me, once this bill had become so emotive and polarized, the best way was to suspend it for some time and bring it at a later date when we have sobered up. But if you force yourself to act when you are not sober, then you are likely to get some bruise. And those who have won the bill may have won the battle, but may not have won the war. The war may have started. And it's very unfortunate that we should have politics of warfare and thuggery.
Thank you, Professor, for sharing your perspective with us. Focus on Parliament now takes a short break. When we return, we focus on the new political order in the United States following the momentous return of Donald J. Trump to the White House. Do stay with us.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back. You are watching Focus on Parliament on Civic Space TV. In this segment, we discuss the new political manifestation or order in the United States of America, which is a global power, after Donald J. Trump has successfully made a comeback to the White House as the 47th president of the United States of America. We interrogate the likely implications this new shift could have for the Ugandan Republic and the political landscape. Professor, does it surprise you that a man whom the American media has characterized as a polarizer, a person that divides both public opinion but also the public, has somewhat made a comeback to the biggest office, you could say, arguably globally in the entire world? Is it a miracle? And what could have precipitated his storming back to the White House?
In fact, you could add on whom the courts have declared a criminal.
Okay.
And somebody who actually subverted the norms of democracy. The other time when he refused to hand over power and instigated violence against
an insurrection against the
Parliament,
state.
Capitol Hill. So there are all those indicators of non-formal politics, of a new norm in politics that is not the traditional democratic processes expected of a civilized country, or a country claiming to be civilized like the USA. I think politics or democracy has ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs. And part of the problem of our political systems and the political class originates from the population. So the population have said what they have said in the USA. There are political factors that have made them reach where they have reached. And there is a wind of change blowing over the world, which is the wind of populism. Populism, people voting by their sentiments and emotions, not by logic, reason, and rationale. And it appears all society, all human beings have a lot they share in common. So you can see in Europe, those populists and extremists are becoming popular. After the Second World War, okay, let's first go to the First World War. The First World War, the Second World War specifically, arose out of such a politics of extremism. The Nazis in Germany, the fascists in Italy, and the similar fascists in Japan had popular support, where there were these sentiments of racism, racial superiority, of chauvinism, of extreme nationalism and patriotism, and it whipped up sentiments, and those leaders got popular support, and they caused the Second World War. After the Second World War, I think people sobered up. They sobered up and realized that this emotional politics was taking people in a wrong direction and causing violence and leading to polarization in the world or in the continents. Now, it seems we are swinging back to that populism. You see people in Italy supporting an extremist populist, people in France, number one, Le Pen, in Hungary,
Netherlands.
And actually Brexit politics was also about this extremism, racism, nationalism, patriotism, and things like that. So that is now the wind of change that is in the US. So you can see any demagogue, any but they can come up and whip up sentiments of people, and the people do not easily link certain issues with their plight. It is like what I said, correlation is not causation. So most of the people in USA, that is those who are not in urban centers, who are not college degree holders, they think that their plight, their poverty, which their income lowering, which is a result of globalization and new technologies, and which have brought in a new phenomenon of high-skilled people and software people coming up, they attribute it to the person in power. Forget about that Biden actually has done very well in terms of the economy. The USA economy is doing perfectly well compared to other G7 countries in the world. But these poor people associated their poverty with Biden. That is correlation and cause, whereas it is not the cause. But anyway, populism now. Trump had the capacity to raise these sentiments of racism and whipped up the sentiments of racial superiority. I think the white population voters supported him because of racism mainly. Now the black supporters voted him because they are poor and they associated their poverty with Biden. You know, that's what they use, Biden administration. And they are looking at these rich people, especially now the digital divide. You know, today there is now a knowledge economy. So the urban centers like New York, California, and the rest, they are populated with people who are knowledgeable, who have knowledge skills, who have digital skills, who are doing very well, and they have attracted the envy of the poor. So the poor have associated their poverty with those rich people. Never mind that even Trump himself supports the rich against the poor. But, you know, they could not easily see it. But the challenge is that we are now witnessing in the whole world politics of identity, which is common here in Africa, politics of racism, politics of nationalism, politics that does not augur well with harmony in the world. And you ask the question about what are the likely implications. One, my take is that the world is in trouble. Why? Because Trump is a protectionist. He wants to protect the economy of the USA. And he's going to put there a lot of tariffs against exports from Europe, exports from China and other developing countries. And this does not bring economic harmony in the world. He is also a racist, and he's going to whip up racial sentiments in the world, which is very unfortunate. He's going to push the world into extremist thinking because his supporters are going to become more extreme and his opponents are also going to become more extreme. And the USA is an example of the world. The whole world looks at USA because it is now the only almost superpower in the world. It has got impact and influence not only at the economic level, but also at paradigm level, at values level, at the thinking level. So we are now going to have extreme views. And far from the original concentration of diagonizing politics as being around economic interests, there are also politics around values. And these are going to polarize the whole world. I know that Trump claims to be supporting conservative values, is against homosexuality, is against euthanasia, is against abortion, is against bisexual values and things like that. But I think he was just using them as an instrument for whipping up political support. After all, those who support him, that he's a family person, he promotes familyhood. I mean, he's, I think, a divorcee or something like that.
Two-time divorcee, but now married.
Married. Something like that. So, we are going to be polarized along those values in the whole world. And we are not going towards a harmonious society, but a divided society. Now, the worst bit of it, he's a climate change skeptic. He does not believe that human beings are responsible for climate change. And he's going to produce more carbon fuel industries. He's going to promote them. He probably is going to withdraw USA again from the Paris Club. He's going to support those who are climate skeptics. And he's taking the world again back in that respect. But you see, the nationals, that is what they like. And democracy has got pitfalls. Let's not think democracy is always beneficial. Quite to the at times it is paradoxical. If you had to bring here democracy to mean what people like, people don't like to be taxed, isn't it? If you had to put it on a referendum that people should not be taxed, people would say, don't tax us. But tax is necessary, you know. So that people support Trump, who has been declared by courts as a criminal, somebody who glaringly is racist, somebody who is subverting democracy, somebody who denied that the elections could be free and fair. But there he is. He represents those sentiments and emotions, and therefore we should now reflect and have a new thinking, a rethinking about democracy. Is democracy necessarily a good thing to have the likes of Trump? I think there is a commentator from China who made one remark that I think we should not, that is China, we should not mind so much about the competition with Russia, with USA, since they could use their democracy to promote somebody like Trump. In other words, their sentiments are reflecting the weaknesses and the paradoxes and contradictions of democracy. That democracy, i.e. meaning going by the sentiments of the majority, does not necessarily lead to positive consequences for the population. Even the likes of Hitler had a popular vote.
Yes.
They were supported by 90% of the population. So let's now rethink the whole notion about democracy, especially in this populist era, when we are having these extremist conservative leaders emerging in the world who are self-centered, who are nationalistic meaning they want to promote their country against other countries, who are extremists in their views and are intolerant, like Trump is, and these views are likely to be reflected in the whole world. And it is likely to increase conflicts, and it could lead to violent conflicts in the world, but much more so, the impact of this might have reverberations on the economies. We are looking for a market, but you can see this protectionism is going now to keep us off as developing countries in terms of the markets, because when he protects the American market, then the others might also start protecting, and I don't know where this protectionism is going to lead the world. So that is the major impact, protectionism and climate change.
Professor, on that point, I want to invite you to discuss the aspect of the diplomatic relations as between Uganda and the United States of America, who has been a long-standing partner of ours in so many various areas, with a specific emphasis on if we are to anticipate or expect a fundamental shift in the foreign policy imperatives of the United States with respect to the relationship between our two countries. What's your take on that?
My take is that we are going to have good relations with USA under Trump. Trump does not mind about what is happening in third world countries. Whether you have authoritarian leaders or your economies are doing poorly or you are killing each other, that is not his concern. So I don't see the Republicans under Trump minding about democracy elsewhere. They are not the type who will export democracy. By the way, under Trump, there were no major exported wars by America in the world under the other administration of Trump. Because for him, he didn't mind whether the Afghanistans can kill each other, whether the people in North Africa can have their authoritarian leaders. That is not the business of Trump. They can do what they want. And so, the Democrats tend to want to export their kind of democracy in the world, which is not necessarily the best, because we see the Democrats increasing wars in the world. They support, for example, Netanyahu to kill Palestinians. So the Democrats have that push of exporting democracy the American way elsewhere. And therefore, they will not mind about whether police in Uganda is beating people or not beating people. That's not their concern. Two, I think the frosty relations between Uganda and USA of recent was over this whole issue of homosexuality. And Trump, at least emotionally, by sentiments, by deceit, I must say, that is my interpretation, is against homosexuality. But I don't think deep down he's against it. But at least by his foreign policy. And therefore, Uganda's relations with USA over that issue of homosexuality, the tension and friction will not be there. Because under Trump, he would not be supporting those values of homosexuality. And two, as I said earlier, he doesn't mind about these issues, whether Uganda has free and fair elections, whether the police violates human rights, not only in Uganda, elsewhere in the world. That's not the concern of Trump. And so, in that regard, I can see the Uganda's relations with the USA under Trump being actually excellent and good. He doesn't mind whether you Ugandans are even poor.
So
he doesn't mind.
You don't expect developments like strengthening the sanction regime against targeted individuals in government.
No way.
Over human rights abuses.
That's not the concern of Trump. No, which human rights abuses, which Trump is not going to do also. He wouldn't mind actually unleashing the police in USA to beat people in USA who are opposed to him. I don't think he would give a damn. Actually, in my opinion, if you removed the skin color of Trump, he would be fitting to be an African president. So, Trump fits to be
by all of his rhetoric,
by
his policies,
by actions, by political behavior and attitudes. He fits in the African presidents. And so, you just remove his skin, he will fit to be an African president. So I don't think he would mind about those human rights issues of liberty of human rights, of freedom of association, freedom of assembly, political prisoners. He doesn't give a damn. You can as well be imprisoned. And unfortunately, those Ugandans who would want to migrate to USA or go to USA now will face it rough. Because he is going to put more limitations and restrictions to immigration to the USA. But as far as foreign policy is concerned, when he was there for 4 years, he never visited Africa. But even Biden is saying
not.
that he wants to visit Angola when he's no longer even the president. I think these USA fellas don't mind about African continent because we have not developed technology to threaten them. We do not have much of the USA investments here, and they can have proxy people represent their interests here without them necessarily being here. But under the democratic regimes, democratic regimes, I mean the democratic governments in USA, you would find this belief that they want to export liberal American model of democracy elsewhere, and that has made them clash with other leaders like African leaders. With Trump, that is not his business. Whether you are authoritarian, you are a dictator, you want to kill yourselves, that is not his much concern. He will only be concerned when more Africans who are running away from authoritarian rule are now forcing themselves into USA. But USA is far from Africa. It is not like Europe, where if you allow authoritarianism in Africa, people will cross to your country. So it is in the self-interest of of European states, to make sure that there is no this push factor from Africa of sending our immigrants to Europe. You know, America is still is far because of the ocean and whatever. So under Trump, I think Uganda's relations with USA are going to improve a lot, but not necessarily positively, because Ugandans going there is going to be limited. It is possible Ugandan exports. I don't know how much exports actually we have with USA. I don't know what interests will USA have in Uganda, possibly our oil and other strategic minerals that we have discovered. But I don't know whether Trump as a person has yet identified those economic potentials that Uganda has. But people in his administration, they have those eyes on those potential. They could have more interest, and we have competition of bigger powers over Uganda like now we do have. I know for sure that France is now interested in Uganda. Actually, of all European countries, the one which is focusing on Uganda is mainly France. And even when other EU countries mention and get concerned about our democratic path and things like that, France has kept quiet. Mainly because they are involved in our oil, Total, and they are interested in using Uganda to access also the oil and other minerals in Congo, in Democratic Republic of Congo.
So it's a frontline anchor
state. So it is now their interests. It is now their interests that are informing them about relations with Uganda so far. So if they clash with USA interests, we could have US administration getting interested in the politics here. But not because they love our human rights and liberties and all that. I don't think that is much of their concern.
Prof, let us now analyze Trump's comeback to the White House in the wider context of the global geopolitics, the international politics. We have two raging wars, intense conflicts that inform, you could say, there would be a major focus of his administration. There is one in the Middle East between the Palestinians and the Israel state. Then there is the conflict in Europe between Russia and the state of Ukraine. Trump has vowed to establish durable peace with respect to both conflicts. How sincere is he in that claim?
I don't think that Trump stands for any principle. He is just somebody who is informed and directed by the issues of the day. Of course, having in mind promotion of private interests. He's not so much interested in public rights. Public rights are not his concern. His major concern is private interests. Private interests of his and private interests of USA, mainly the corporations, the big capital. That is his major interest. So I can see him changing the political landscape in Europe. In fact, Europe is already meeting. European leaders are already meeting about the Trump administration, where he may not support NATO, or at least fund NATO against the Soviet Union. And so in that regard, he might change the politics and the war in Ukraine in favor maybe of Russia and strengthen Russia's influence in Europe, which might now bring friction between Europe and Russia and the USA. He's likely to increase the friction with China over the trade war and the question of Taiwan, and therefore increase friction in that part of the world. But in the mix of things, it seems he's less interested in extending and exporting wars. He is going to give a green light to Netanyahu to do what he likes with the Palestinians. In fact, during the campaigns, he did say that he was criticizing Biden, that Biden is actually delaying Netanyahu to finish the work, meaning to finish off Palestinians. Whether Palestinians die, from his racist point of view, that is not much of his concern. But at the same time, he would not want to use USA capital funds to fund the Israel war. That is not so much his focus. His focus is national interests and business interests in the USA. So in that regard, we might see, on the other hand, less of political wars and ideological wars, but much of the trade wars in the world. That's how I'm looking at it. But you see, USA is not a third world country. USA politics sometimes are driven by other institutions of the state. So its foreign policy is still driven by the CIA, is driven by the military industrial complex, is driven by the state operatives and state institutions, not necessarily by Trump as an individual. So we cannot rule out USA poking its nose in these other countries. But Trump as a person, he seems to be obsessed with Iran. And we are likely to have a showdown with Iran, and therefore complicating the Middle East politics, which will have some negative reverberations with us, especially when the trade routes in the Middle East are interfered with by Iran. And in that case, he's likely to support Israel vis-a-vis Iran, but not necessarily vis-a-vis the Palestinians, although he's the one who supported Israel to declare Jerusalem its capital city. He definitely is pro-Israel. but maybe not so much ready to foot their bills to fight the war. But he's pro Israel, but he's also his capital, because he has capital interests in other Arab countries like Saudi Arabia. So if Saudi Arabia plays its card very well, it could be a neutralizing influence on the foreign policy of Trump, because he wouldn't want to jeopardize his business interests also in the other Arab countries. But for Africa, we are likely generally to have good relations with USA now, because he will not be bothered about these authoritarian leaders in Africa. He will just be interested in promoting his business interests in Africa. So as far as private interests are concerned, he's likely to be the president that Africa can have business with. As far as public rights are concerned, Africa is in for a rough ride. He will not bother whether NGOs are trampled upon, whether the NGO people are silenced. That is not the business of Trump. Public interests or public values are not his concern. His concern is private interests, which are basically cooperation and business interests.
You paint a rather grim outlook, but Prof, I'm going to ask you to make your...
grim outlook for those who are interested in promoting their business, it could be positive. But those who are interested in human rights, public rights issues, they should be ready to be dominated and controlled by corporation interests. So corporation interests are going to be high on the agenda vis-a-vis public rights and interests.
Thank you, Professor. Your concluding remarks on the program.
My concluding remarks is that democracy has got pitfalls. Democracy has got shortcomings. Democracy has paradoxes and contradictions. But as Churchill put it, when he said that democracy is the worst form of government he had ever witnessed, except that there is no alternative. So we need to use democracy as an instrument for creating peace. Democracy as an instrument for nation building. Democracy as an instrument for cohesive coexistence. And learn some examples from USA, where after elections you don't find tension, especially now the Democrats who have accepted their defeat. But before they accepted the defeat, they, having known that the electoral commission and the electoral process and administration was free and fair, and the military did not intervene on one side or the other, and the state resources were not used in favor of one group and against another group. And that's why the losers have taken it easily. And I am very excited about the speeches both of Kamala Harris and Biden. President. You see, I am yet to hear about Trump also, what he says. You see, in Africa, you find victory speeches of people boasting. And this creates tension with the other people you have defeated. In my language, in Runyankore, if I can use it for those who can get it.
Please.
I would advise that when you win elections, when you are the winner, oyesime konka reka kwesimirana. Oyesime otesimirana. What it translated in English is that, please celebrate, but don't boast to your colleagues and increase their misery and tension and annoyance. But what happens here in Africa when you defeat some people, you say, we have defeated you. If you cannot be with us, you better go and look for elsewhere to stay. No, that's not the issue. And then there's who are defeated. They do not say, we are going to fight you, we are going to the bush, and the way Kamala Harris said, no problem, we have been defeated, but we are still on our feet. We still believe in our values, and we are going to continue promoting and pushing them. One day, we shall also come to power and continue pushing our agenda of the vision of democracy that we have. So that we have a civil competition, not a militarized competition. What we experience in parliament this week in Uganda is actually frustrating and doesn't give us good hope of having civil competition, competition of values, competition of ideas, not competition of organism.
Thank you, Professor. I must appreciate you for your insightful views on the program and for your patriotic guidance to the citizenry out there. Once again, our viewers, we appreciate you for keeping us company from the start of this program up to its conclusion. Much appreciation to the production department for keeping us live on air. Our esteemed viewers, please engage us on our various social media platforms. We are on X, we are on Instagram, we are on Facebook. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can also watch this program. We'll see you next time. Be blessed.